Ladies and gentlemen, Paul Begala thinks he has Pete Hegseth nailed.
He has spent $15 million in 1 month for ribeye steaks, $6.9 million for lobster tail, $225 million for furniture. He spent more in the month of September than most countries on earth spend in their defense.
Paul, do you believe
all for himself? Lobster tails?
Do you believe
while our troops are eating MREs?
No. Do
tails?
you believe the Secretary of Defense is personally eating all the lobster?
I'm Rich Lowry of National Review, and Begala was so confident there and so wrong. Now, at the end of that clip, Scott Jennings, as is his wont on CNN, was about to swoop in and save the day with the truth bomb. But why does this happen so often? Why are progressives so absolutely confident in things that are incorrect? As Ronald Reagan says, it's not that our liberal friends are ignorant, it's just that they know so much that is not the case. And CNN, by the way, is an epicenter of this phenomenon. Just the other day, here's Abby Phillip talking about the bomb attack on anti-Mamdani protesters.
Two Republicans say Muslims don't belong here after an attempted terror attack against New York's Mayor Zohran Mamdani, and the House Speaker Mike Johnson says nothing really to condemn those comments. Another special guest is going to be with us at the table when we.
So what she said there was completely upside down. This attempted bomb attack, it wasn't emanating implicitly from the right against Mamdani, as she said. It was Islamist targeting anti-Mamdani protesters. Now, to Phillip's credit, she did correct this subsequently. She pointed out, at least implicitly, that this wasn't her saying this on her own. Instead, she was reading prompter and an outro, so it was written for her. But it doesn't really make it any better. That means there was someone on CNN whose job is to follow the news, who works at a news show, who is writing prompter script for a news anchor, had no idea what had happened days earlier in New York City, even though there had been extensive coverage, even though you could go on X and see for yourself what had happened, even though CNN had already been embroiled in a controversy over its ridiculous coverage of this attempted bombing just earlier in the day, still got it wrong. Somehow it just couldn't permeate the CNN ecosystem that an Islamist was guilty of this attack, actually two Islamists rather than far-right provocateurs. But I want to come back to the Lobster story. Now, all this goes to a left-wing information bubble that's existed for a very long time, but has gotten much worse in the Trump years. They want to believe anything disparaging possible about Trump or anyone around him. And the Pentagon supposedly buying all the steak and lobster for Pete Hegseth is just too good for them to check. Here is MS Now and Seth Meyers.
Today, we got reports that initial estimates showed Trump's war cost American taxpayers $5.6 billion in just the first 2 days. At the same time, a new report from an external government watchdog finds that Pete Hegseth's Pentagon was already on a massive spending spree before the war began, dropping $15 million on, wait for it, if you haven't seen this story, look it up, steak, and another $6.9 million on lobster tail in just the month of September.
They spent $15 million on steak in 1 month? Who are you, Sterling Cooper, Draper, and Price? If you're gonna eat that much steak, you better have come up with a new campaign for Lucky Strike. No wonder Hegseth always looks miserable. He's 24/7 meat constipated. That's the face of a man war fighting with his colon. Also, it's a real contradiction that you're telling us how tough you are, but now I can only picture you wearing a bib.
Here's Democratic pundit John Avlon.
The Secretary of Defense is off, trying to fire photographers for taking unflattering photos and spending $20,000 on lobster. I mean, this is not time on task.
Now, all this emanated from a viral and desperately flawed report from the left-wing magazine, The New Republic. The story reported on a watchdog group that had delved into Pentagon spending, and the report purported to highlight a bunch of things that couldn't be considered, quote, a pertinent military expense. Among those, according to the piece, an astronomical amount of shellfish, including $2 million for Alaskan king crab and $6.9 million worth of lobster tail. Parentheses, lobster tail is apparently a favorite of Hegseth's Pentagon. The department spent more than $7.4 million total on the luxury item in March, May, June, and October. Close parentheses. In other pricey food purchases, the department decided to drop $15.1 million for ribeye steak, again, just in September. $124,000 for ice cream machines, and $139,000 on 272 orders of donuts. Now, the New Republic ran this item to own Pete Hegseth and to please its own side, but it ended up making idiots of its own side because this was so poorly informed. If you just thought about it for a second, or if you know anything about the military, first of all, was it $6.9 million in a month for lobster tail? If that's all for Hegseth, and we assume that it's $25 per lobster tail or something like that, we're talking 270,000 lobster tails in a month. Hegseth and the people around him are supposedly eating that. Also, Selena Zito pointed this out on X. She notes a 2024 story when Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense, quote, the military spent $103 million on meat, fish, and poultry, including $16 million on ribeye steak and 147 orders of lobster tail for a cool $6.1 million. Orders of blueberries, ice cream, and donuts also exceeded $100,000. Now, those are points that might have occurred to people if they thought about it just for a second or Google around a little bit. But then there's the more fundamental thing that feasting the military is a deeply entrenched tradition that goes back at least to Homer. And we've done it in the American military for a very long time. Often a sign you're about to go on a tough deployment or your deployment is going to be extended. Any member of the military knows about this. Anyone who knows a member of the military knows about this. So another factor here is just the deep ignorance among a certain class of people, largely but not entirely, in the pundit class on the left and among Democratic politicians that know nothing about the military, are completely ignorant about it. So here's a great video just recently on TikTok. Guys getting their steak and lobster meal, and what does one of them say about it? At one point, we're going to war.
Brothers Defect has steak and lobster. How's your steak and lobster?
It's all right. Damn near decent.
How's yours?
I'm ready for war.
We're going to war. I might have to double it. I had to run it back.
Here's a great clip from Joey Jones, great vet, pundit on Fox News, talking really movingly about how he was in the thick of it in the Iraq War. He and his guys were out, had a real tough day out in the field. They come back to this little base, and somehow the military had undertaken the effort at great danger to the folks driving these trucks to get them lobster and steak, and just how meaningful that was.
You see these tweets about, Pete Hegseth has spent $15 million on steak and lobster. Are you serious? That is the only thing about home. That's the only thing that makes you feel special for the entire time you're there watching your buddies die and you're mad about that. The fact that people aren't smart enough to even look up what that's for before they criticize it.
But none of this matters to Democratic politicians and pundits. You've seen all these completely toxic and stupid posts on X. Debbie Dingle, Trump and Republicans took food assistance away from hungry children, working parents, and veterans while enjoying $93 billion of things like lobster and steak. Jasmine Crockett, exactly the same thing. While they're busy cutting SNAP and healthcare for working families, Pete Hegseth spent $2 million on king crab, nearly $7 million on lobster tails, nearly $100,000 on a grand piano. This is where your tax dollars are going. TMZ, Pete Hegseth blew billions on shellfish, steak, fruit baskets, and furniture. RT even got into the act. Pete Hegseth's Defense Department reportedly buys $22 million worth of, all caps, luxury steak and lobster. The purchase was part of a larger end-of-year spending frenzy of its immense budget. Unrelated footage of Hegseth devouring a steak in New York City, 2024. You could go on and on and on with these. One thing that's particularly annoying about this phenomenon is a lot of these people pride themselves on supposedly being the best informed people in American life. They read the New York Times, they listen to NPR, they follow the best journalists on Twitter, and then they turn out to be incredibly susceptible to their own side's poor journalism and propaganda, which is one reason why they are so out of touch with basic facts of American life, including that our troops get and deserve lobster and steak nights. I'm Rich Lowry. over and out.